Craigslist is almost never the first place I go when I need to buy something, but sometimes you can get good deals on things that would otherwise be really expensive. At the time, I was searching for new workout equipment. Weights and machines are really expensive to buy new, so Craigslist was the perfect way to find used ones for cheap. Anyways, I scrolled through the site for a few days before eventually finding a posting that looked really good. It was a set of weights for a pretty good deal and was posted only a few hours ago. The poster's name was Mary, so I sent her an email and told her I was very interested in her weight set and would like to pick them up as soon as possible. Mary replied just a few minutes later, saying that she was available tonight when she got home from work at 7. It was a little bit late, but it wasn't too big of a deal for me since I wanted them as soon as possible. I agreed, and she responded with her address. Of course, I looked it up to see where it was and what the house looked like. It was 20 minutes away in a small neighborhood that I was actually familiar with, as one of my old friends used to live nearby. The house was regular sized and didn't have any real defining features other than the fact that it looked pretty old, but nothing looked too strange or gave me bad vibes, so that night I drove down there. The place was at the end of the road in a cul-de-sac, so I parked on the side of the house by their mailbox and made my way up to the front door, which was already opened. I didn't want to just walk into the house, so I knocked on the open door a few times to get their attention. A moment later, a man comes down from the hall. Hi, I was supposed to meet with Mary to look at some workout stuff she had posted on Craigslist. The man's face lit up, and he said to come on in. He told me that Mary would be down in a few minutes, as she was changing out of her work clothes. This definitely made me cautious, but he sounded genuine and believable, so I followed him into his living room where there was a set of weights on the ground. However, aside from the weights, there was nothing else in the room, no furniture or decorations at all. I think the man saw me looking around, as he quickly said that they were in the process of moving out and that's why they were trying to sell the weights. Still skeptical, I looked at them for a second, but immediately noticed that a few plates were missing. I asked him if this was everything, as I thought I saw more in the pictures. He smiled again, telling me that Mary might know where the other ones are, but then he just stood there looking at me. I got really uncomfortable and asked him if he could go check on Mary to let her know I was here. He waited for a moment, and then he agreed and walked up the stairs. I was obviously beginning to worry that Mary might not even be a real person at this point, so I listened intently to make sure he was talking to someone. After a few seconds of silence, I went over to the bottom of the stairs and looked up towards the top. The man was standing there at the top, just staring at the wall, probably waiting up there to make it seem like he actually went to ask someone. I fell into a panic, knowing now that this was all a lie and I was likely in the middle of something horrible. I started to quickly walk towards the front door, trying not to alert the man, but as soon as I turned around, I heard heavy footsteps rushing down the stairs. He called out for me to wait as I ran straight out the front door and into my car. Strangely, as I drove away, the guy ran out the front door and around the side of the house. I pulled over after driving out of the neighborhood and called the police to let them know what happened, in hopes that they could figure out what was going on. I didn't really know what the man's plan was, but I was confident enough that he was up to something. The officers later came by my house and I gave them more information. They told me that the house I met him at had nobody living there for over a year, which made chills run through my body. Of course, though, I couldn't really give them much helpful information other than a description of what the man looked like. And other than that, all they had to go off of was the weights that he'd put in the empty house that may have fingerprints on them. It worries me that he might still be out there trying to lure people into abandoned homes, but I'm also glad that I was able to make it out of there before he did whatever it was that he planned on doing. I had just graduated college, and I needed a small place to stay while I searched for a new job. I worked part-time at a small grocery store, but now that I graduated, it was time to start looking for a better job. Anyways, apartments were way too expensive to rent on my own, so I was mainly looking for places with spare rooms for rent. I knew it would be awkward for a while living in someone else's house, but I didn't have much of a choice to be honest. My old roommate from college suggested looking on Craigslist, as most other sites at the time didn't let you post single rooms in a house, or maybe it was just really hard to find them. Either way, Craigslist seemed to have a ton of options to choose from, so I stuck with it. After a few days though, I started to get frustrated as none of the people would reply to my requests, and the ones that did would just apologize and say it was already taken. But then on Saturday morning, a new room popped up. It was nearby, cheap, and looked pretty nice. In the description, a man named Tom was advertising it as a large house with a spare bedroom for rent that also had a separate bathroom and closet. This sounded perfect to me, so I emailed him about my interest and then went to work. I knew the listing had just been posted that morning, so I felt confident that I was the first one to contact him. On my lunch break, I checked my emails and Tom had replied, asking me to come and view it that afternoon. I knew I'd be tired after work, but I also really wanted this place, so I agreed and we set a time. After work, I drove straight there, which was only about 10 minutes. From the outside, the house looked really nice. It honestly just looked like a regular medium-sized neighborhood home. I parked on the side of the road and walked up to the door, then lightly knocked. After 30 seconds, I knocked again, a little bit harder this time. A minute later, I pulled my phone out to text Tom, but just before I sent it, he opened the door and invited me in. I immediately noticed he was sweating a lot, as if he had just finished a long workout, and he smelled awful. I didn't want to be rude or anything, so I just ignored it. He began walking me around the ground level floor, showing me the kitchen and the living room. He mentioned that he didn't use these rooms often, so I wouldn't have to worry about getting in his way. From the look of the rooms, though, it seemed as though he used them too often. Old dishes were piled up in the sink, and the couch had stains all over it. I really didn't like how dirty the whole place was, and it was strange that in the pictures it looked like the house was really clean. One thing I remembered specifically was that the living room had a brown leather couch in the picture, but the couch that was actually there was black. I figured Tom had probably used the pictures of the house from years ago before it sold. I was a bit annoyed at the dishonesty of it, but all that really mattered was my room, which was upstairs. Tom led the way to the stairs, then stopped when he reached the bottom of the steps and held his hand out in a gesturing manner as if he wanted me to head up first. I got a weird and uncomfortable feeling as I started up the stairs, as Tom didn't follow me. He stayed at the bottom and smiled, saying that my room would be the first one on the left. I continued to the top and took a couple steps into the hallway before a soft thud came from behind the door to what was said to be my room. I looked back down the stairs at Tom, whose smile was now completely gone. Does someone else live here?" He replied in an annoyed tone, telling me that it was just one of his friends staying the night and not to worry about it, then urged me to check out the room for myself as he was sure that I'd like it. I was definitely pretty nervous at this point, scared even. Why wouldn't he have told me that someone else was here? It seemed like something that I should know. Everything started adding up, and all I wanted was to get out of there right away. I tried to act confident and began walking down the stairs as I explained that the place wasn't going to work out for me. He didn't seem to like that answer, and he moved his body to block most of the bottom of the stairs. I stood a couple steps away and firmly told him that I needed to leave. He asked me again to check out the bedroom to at least see if I liked it, and again I said I was not interested. He looked at me for a moment, then to my surprise he smiled and said okay, stepping aside. I quickly walked past him and straight out the front door. I don't know what was going on in that house, but something didn't feel right about any of it. I even felt lucky to have been able to leave so easily. In the moment, I thought I was going to have to force my way out. I checked Craigslist a couple hours later, and the posting had been removed. I still wonder who and what was in that room upstairs. For all I know, it could have just been an empty room, but something tells me that it was something much worse. I lived with a friend of mine, who I'll refer to as Nick, in a small house for a few years during college. He was my roommate for the first year, and then we decided to move out of the dorms and share the rent on a house since we both had decent enough jobs. This was both of our first times renting a place, so we didn't really know how to budget properly. After a few months, everything was okay, but it was almost a year in when we realized that this place was eating up both of our bank accounts. So the obvious solutions were to either move out or find another roommate. Neither of us wanted to leave, so we started the search for a roommate. We started by asking all of our other friends, but none of them were interested, so really the only option was to put up a post online. I made a post on Facebook Marketplace, and Nick made a post on Craigslist. Again, neither of us have ever done this, and it felt kinda weird, but we knew we didn't have much of a choice. A few weeks went by, with just a couple of responses, but none of them seriously considering moving in, before Nick shows me an email he got from someone named Sam replying to his Craigslist post. The guy seemed legit, and the following day he came over to view the house. I should mention, he was a couple years older than us and had just graduated, but he seemed pretty nice and looked clean and everything, so we were glad to have him. He agreed to the split of rent and moved in the next week. In the few months following, Sam would hang out with us a lot, and we actually got to know him pretty well. But then all of a sudden, he became very closed off for some reason. Nick and I would barely ever see the guy, and when we did, he wouldn't even talk. He would sit in his room for the most part, with his door shut, and would only come out to get food or to go to work. It didn't bother me necessarily, I just found it a little strange. Anyways, it was around month 4 with him being there that things started to take a turn for the worst. I had just gotten home from work, and immediately as I walked through the door, Nick calls my name quietly from the living room.
"What's going on?"
He mentions that Sam was home, so to not talk too loud. Then he tells me about a strong smell he noticed when passing his room today. I told him I hadn't noticed it. He points down the hall towards Sam's room and tells me to quietly walk past and see if I notice. So I got up and made my way quietly down the hall towards Sam's door. I didn't even have to get very close to smell what he was talking about. It was awful and really disgusting. I had no idea what it was, and had definitely never smelled it in the house before. Nick suggested we ask him what it was, and I agreed. We both went to his door, trying not to breathe in too hard, and knocked. Then knocked again and again, calling out to him. He didn't answer. Nick said he was sure that Sam was in there, but after a couple more minutes we just gave up and figured we'd ask him tomorrow. It was already pretty late at this point, so we both made a quick dinner and then ate while watching TV in the living room, and then we both went to bed. The next day, I caught Sam on his way out of the house and asked him what the smell was last night.
I was just taking out the trash."
He quickly left and drove off. That answer didn't really make any sense to me, but I didn't want to press him too hard. I told Nick later that day, and he agreed that it was weird, but didn't know what else to do, so we left it at that. Another couple weeks go by. Again, Sam barely talked to us, but the smell had gone away by now. I got home from work late one night, and Nick and Sam were both in their rooms, already asleep probably, so I pretty much went straight up to my room and fell asleep as well. But sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up hearing some movement below my room, which was where Sam's room was located downstairs. I listened for a couple minutes, trying to figure out what he was doing, but eventually I fell back asleep. The next morning, Sam ran out of the house to go to work as usual. However, he didn't return home that night. Another couple days would go by, and he still hadn't come home. I called him multiple times, and his phone instantly went to voicemail. We were actually starting to get worried, and decided to check his room to see if there were any clues as to what was going on. His room was pretty messy, and actually kind of looked like a lot of his stuff had been packed up and taken out. I also found a pair of glasses in his drawer, with some other random belongings, which was weird because Sam didn't wear glasses. He left some clothes and all of his furniture behind though, which made us believe that he didn't just move out suddenly. Nick ended up calling the police to notify them about Sam possibly being missing, and an officer arrived that night to investigate and ask us questions. We told him everything we knew and let him look at his room. Nick also gave him a picture that we had taken together back when Sam first moved in. After that, we didn't get an update until a week later. A different detective called us and informed us that the identity of the man in the photo with us was not Sam. They said a family member recognized them as their missing son who had been gone for almost a year. After that, the case got a lot more complicated, and we didn't have much helpful information because the guy pretty much lied about everything he told us. So after a little bit, we lost contact and stopped getting updates. As far as we were told, the man was just some regular guy that was living with his parents, who suddenly went missing for no known reason. He never came back to our house though, and I'm not sure if he was ever found. It's definitely the most interesting and creepy experience I've had though. Just knowing that I was living in the same house as someone who made up a completely fake identity and was legally missing gives me chills every time I think about it. It's pretty hard not to assume that this man was trying to hide from the police because of something he had done, or was still doing. Craigslist is not something I would use often. I mean, less than once a year for sure. But sometimes it's just the easiest way to sell something that would otherwise be impossible to sell quickly. However, after this happened to me about 3 years ago, I never used Craigslist again. I was 22 at the time and lived in a very small house with a roommate of mine for over a year before he moved out. The lease ended in a few months anyways, and without a roommate to split the rent with, I could no longer afford the property. Thus, I had to move out as well. It wasn't too hard to find an apartment, but it was way smaller than the house was. This meant that I pretty much needed to get rid of all of my furniture. The couch was basically unused, and my roommate and I bought it just over a year ago when he moved in, so it would be a total waste to just put it on the side of the road for someone to pick up. The thing was expensive, and I could really use any extra money to help with the move, so of course I resorted to Craigslist. This was my first time ever selling anything on the site, as I was always the one to buy stuff instead. I'd never had any weird experiences, aside from just the awkward feeling of being in someone else's house and meeting a stranger. Though, being the person selling this time, I felt much more comfortable since I would be at my house. Anyway, it took a bit over 2 weeks for someone who was seriously interested to reply to the ad and ask to come check it out. He ended up calling me to ask a few questions about it. Honestly, it made me feel better, since I assumed he was probably just trying to be safe and make sure I wasn't some creep. His name was David, and he told me that he moved into a new house and needed some cheap furniture to fill the space. I mentioned that I was in the exact opposite position, leaving my house for an apartment. He responded, asking politely why I was leaving, to which I told him that my roommate left, so I couldn't really afford it anymore. He sounded nice though, which I guess made me tell him more than I should have. We set a time after we were both off of work on a Saturday evening around 6 o'clock. When that time came around, I left the front door open and waited. I sat on the couch for over an hour just waiting for the guy to show up before eventually shutting the front door and going to the kitchen to make some food, assuming he just bailed on me. But then the doorbell rang only minutes later. It was 7:30 at this point, so I was obviously a little upset, but I tried to fake a smile and opened the door. "Hey, I'm David," he said as he held his hand out for a handshake. He was a tall, larger man with a very large grin on his face. I shook his hand and invited him inside, showing him into the living room. He looked at it for a second, nodding his head in approval, before I heard footsteps outside the front door, followed by it opening and 2 more men walking inside. "Sorry, these are my buddies that are moving in with me. Hope you don't mind." Yeah, that's fine," I said nervously, knowing that there wasn't much I could do about it. Honestly, I was starting to get really uneasy though, and had a bad feeling in my gut. I tried to not think about it, telling myself I was overthinking it, but my feelings would not suppress. David walked to the other side of the couch and knelt down a bit as if he was inspecting something. Then he stood back up. "What's this over here?" he said, pointing down at the side of the couch. With the other 2 men standing behind me, I reluctantly walked over to where he was standing and looked down at the couch. "I don't see anything." He pointed again, as if he wanted me to get down and look. The 2 other men came closer, standing in front of me, while David was behind me. Slowly, I knelt down and looked at the side, still not seeing anything. I could feel all of them breathing over me, making me feel powerless and terrified. "I'm just messing with ya. There's nothing there," David exclaimed, giving me a hard pat on the back as I stood up. I let out a nervous chuckle and moved myself a few steps away. I could see the other men had creepy smiles on their faces as they looked at David as if plotting something. I tried my best to remain calm and think of a way out of this situation, but they were in my house, I couldn't just leave, and I was too scared to ask them to leave. "So, do you like it?" I asked, trying to speed up this process. David looked at his friends and then back at me. His happy, smiling expression had shifted. There was a very odd moment of silence as I stared into David's empty eyes. A calm before the storm. One of the men tackled me to the ground, pinning me down aggressively. My instant reaction to resist was overpowered by his strength, and I gave up quickly, just hoping to not be any further harmed. David and the other man ran through the house, looting it of everything valuable, creating chaos and mess in all of the rooms. The man on top of me continued to hold me tightly, pushing my head into the hard wooden floor with all of his weight. After a few minutes, David called out by the front door, and the man got off of me and ran out of the house. I heard their truck pull out and speed off, as I laid on the ground in shock, pain, and terror. After a couple minutes, I gathered myself up and slowly stumbled to the front door to close and lock it. I called the cops soon after. To no one's surprise, David wasn't his real name, nor was the email or phone number attached to any identifiable person. They collected some fingerprints around the house and took pictures of their shoe prints on the ground, but the case ran cold with no suspects at all. The only thing they were able to identify was that the shoe prints left at my house were the same as ones left at someone else's house a few weeks ago during a similar attack and robbery. That person was also alone in their home. It's suspected that they try to find those who live alone, so obviously I kind of fucked myself over by telling the man about my roommate who had left. Either way, that experience has caused me a lot of stress and anger. I was blinded by the feeling of safety being in my own home and was taken advantage of because of it. Sites like Craigslist are dangerous, and people need to be more aware of the dangers of willingly inviting unknown, seemingly innocent people into their homes. I tried buying a truck off of Craigslist some years ago, and before you say anything, it was a great price and I wasn't in the best financial situation. I'd never actually used Craigslist before, but I knew it was an average place for people to sell their stuff, which meant that it was usually cheap. Even with the cheap prices of cars on the site, I still had to ask my dad for money because I didn't even have the few $1,000s in my account that I needed in cash for a cheap car. After a bit of scrolling though, I messaged this guy who posted his truck for $4,000 and he got back pretty quickly, answering all of my questions on it and giving what sounded like honest answers. He basically said that it wasn't the nicest looking, but it'll get you where you gotta be in a reliable manner. Interested, he agreed to meet me at a Burger King that was a halfway point of where we both lived. I got there first, taking an Uber, and he showed up maybe 5 minutes later. We chatted for a bit, and he told me more about the truck, mentioning minor issues it's given him in the past, but nothing too serious. After all, I didn't have the money to be picky. Of course, I asked if I could test drive it, to which he said that he knew a less busy parking lot and I could test drive it there. Honestly, I was like, alright, whatever, and I took my phone out to get a quick Uber, but he said it was just across the street and that we could just ride together. I didn't want to be rude, and had never done something like this before, so I kind of assumed it was a normal thing. Looking back, I should have told him to F off, but I was young and he was old, so for some reason I trusted him. As I got inside, he asked me if I had my license on me, which was just another reason I trusted him. He seemed like he was a genuine guy. He started driving, though we went a little further than across the street, probably a few blocks away from the Burger King, to this empty parking lot away from the main road, which was the first red flag to come up, even though it should have been the second or third.
Alright, let's switch,
he said, putting the car in park. As we were passing each other around the car, he threw me the keys, saying heads up, but they landed nowhere near me. I mean, I would have had to dive into the concrete to catch them. Awkwardly, I went to pick them up, and just as I bent down, I felt the weight of his foot slam against my side, and before I knew it, he was on top of me, ripping my wallet out of my back pocket and running back towards the truck. I immediately grabbed the keys from the ground, thinking he must have forgotten them in the heat of the moment, and that I could possibly force a trade. Unfortunately though, the keys he threw at me must have just been fake, because he just drove away, leaving me stranded there stupidly. What makes everything worse is that it all happened so fast I couldn't even get the damn license plate. I still had my phone though, and the first thing I did was cancel the only card I had, because I couldn't risk him spending money I didn't have, and then I called the police. I walked back to the Burger King and filed a report when they met me there, but with only the description of a rusty white truck and an average middle-aged white guy, nothing ever came of it. He took the ad down, and his email wasn't even a real name. Apparently it was just named after a video game character, and again, I didn't get his plates. So all in all, I lost $4,000 of straight cash, had to wait for a new card in the mail, had to get a new license, and they didn't even catch the guy. I used to work for a big maid company, but I left after my ex-coworker told me that she was making more than triple just working by herself and listing ads on Craigslist Marketplace. So of course, I looked into it, and eventually began doing that as well. I was making amazing money for close to 7 months before anything weird happened. Ever since, I have never encountered someone that creepy, and I hope I never do again. I had answered a usual email from someone asking me to clean their house. The way it works is they tell me what rooms they want me to do, and I charge the price based on how long I think it will take. To do this, I have to go to their house to make an estimate, or they can send me a video walkthrough. This is the way we did it at my old company, except I charge a much better price, and people feel more comfortable with the same person coming over every week. The man had sent me a video walkthrough of his house, and it was very clean already, which happens with a lot of clients who just want to maintain that cleanliness and have someone get the nitty-gritties. We set a date and time, and a few days later I went for the first time clean. I was going to be there for about 3.5 hours, doing the top and bottom floor, no basement, and giving extra care to the kitchen and bathroom tiles. He greeted me at the door and led me upstairs so I can work my way down, and this is where everything went to shit. I began cleaning, expecting him to leave, but he kind of just stands there watching me, which I sometimes have happen with older women who are control freaks, but this guy wasn't looking at what I was cleaning. He was eyeing me. I ask him if he wants me to do anything else, and he just stands there for a second.
You know, when I saw your ad on Craigslist, I knew I had to have you.
At first, I didn't think of this in any kind of flirty way. I just saw this as some older white guy telling me, a Mexican woman, that I was meant to be good at cleaning. I didn't really care. I've heard it all the time. They usually just say things out of ignorance. But I wanted the money, so I kept my mouth shut and faked a response.
Oh, well, thank you. I usually ask that people stay out of the room, though. It's just easier to clean that way.
He said no problem, but clearly there was, because while he left that room, he went to the room just across the hallway and sat on the bed and watched me from there. At this point, I was getting creeped out, and the thought of him watching me for 3.5 hours was very unsettling. I had an idea, and after I dusted, I started to vacuum, going behind the door so I could move it, leaving it only cracked open slightly, so that for the rest of this room at least, he wouldn't be able to look at me. I just had to get through this day, get paid, and never come here again. I moved to the bathroom that was connected to the room. I was about 20 minutes in, and scrubbing grout when I felt that I was being looked at again. I turned around, and sure enough, he was there in the doorway.
Sorry to bother you. I forgot to tell you to leave the vanity as is. It was my wife's. She died years ago in '09. It's been really rough, going through all that, so I want to preserve it.
I said okay, and after a moment of silence and awkward staring, he finally left. I wondered why he didn't just put in special instructions to not touch the master bathroom vanity if it were so important. But as I was cleaning around it, I noticed there was some makeup on the counter that I knew had only come out a few years ago. This was 2017, and he said his wife died in 2009, but the makeup lying on the counter had a few products that came out no earlier than 2015, and I knew this because I was excited when they came out. And for what it's worth, if this vanity had been preserved, it would have looked a lot worse. If I wasn't sketched out before, I definitely was now. Thankfully, for the rest of the time I was upstairs, he didn't look at me or talk to me. I was dreading going downstairs, but I was halfway done and just needed to get the rest of it over with. I got to the kitchen and started there. From the kitchen, you could see the living room, and again, something was off. This guy had 0 pictures hanging up. I've cleaned so many homes, hundreds at this point, and I've never seen a house with no pictures. Even people that lived alone had at least holiday cards of other people's families on their fridge. I don't know why it freaked me out so much, but it did. And right when I decided I was just gonna do the rest really fast and cut some of the cost for him, he appeared in the archway and asked if I could do him a favor. I hesitantly asked what, to which he said he knows it specifically says no basement, but he forgot he's having guests over next week, and that was where the pool table and everything was, and he just wants it quickly vacuumed. I told him I was on a really tight schedule, and wasn't sure if I could do it today, but maybe next time. He then said I could skip the dining room, cause it's never in use, and just do the basement floors instead. I responded, explaining that I could come back tomorrow and do the whole basement instead of just the floors if he wanted, just trying to push it off a little bit. But this was when his whole demeanor changed. He started to get really weird, and said that he just wants the floor done, and he couldn't understand why I wouldn't just do it today. He went on to say that he and his wife really needed the floors done down there. His wife? The one that had died years ago. That was the moment I realized that this guy was clearly trying to do something horrible, but I didn't know what. I told him, if I have time I will.
Well, can I just show you what needs to get done down there? It won't take long, just really quick.
Knowing he wasn't going to stop, I pretended to get a phone call, so I went to the other room. I then called my friend to explain what was happening. He was still watching me carefully, so I spoke in Spanish, praying he didn't know any. She agreed to drive to this address and make sure when I left he didn't try to follow me, or worse. I got off the phone and told him that I had a family emergency and I could come back tomorrow to finish everything, which was obviously a lie. He looked at me with the coldest look on his face and replied,
"Don't bother."
Then he walked upstairs while I gathered my things. I knew I wasn't going to get paid, but at this point I just felt lucky to leave. My friend got there while I was loading my trunk, and the guy was staring at me through the window the entire time. I left, and when I got home I called the police to tell them what happened, but there wasn't much they can do, since he didn't break the law, he was just being creepy. They basically just told me the obvious, to not go there again, which I clearly wasn't going to. Just a reminder for everyone, if you provide a service through sites like Craigslist, there's no sure way to tell who's weird and who's not. So make sure to trust your gut and always let someone know the address you're going to and when you're supposed to leave, just in case. I don't know what was wrong with that guy or what he had planned for me in that basement, but I hope nobody else has to find out.